Bon dia, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those following us in the East Coast of the United States, and good evening to those following us in Portugal and other parts of the Portuguese-speaking world. Muito bem-vindos a todos. Our session will be in English, and so today we're very, very happy on behalf of the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institute, PBBI, from California State University, Fresno, to have this presentation. We have been looking forward to it. He has been our guest in the past, and we're happy to have him here today for our students, for those following us here, for those who are following in different classrooms that have agreed to carry it, and also those following us on social media outlets as well. So Commander Jorge Bettencourt has been a part of our guest list in the past. He was a young man, not that he's any less young today, but it has been a few years since the revolution. So he was a very young cadet then at the time during the revolution that occurred in Portugal in 1974. And we are working as hard as we can to make sure that as we already move forward to the 50th anniversary, that for the possibility of Commander Jorge Bettencourt to be here next year to celebrate the revolution here in person with us at Fresno State and at University of California, Berkeley as well. And so welcome to Commander Jorge Bettencourt, who is a retired commander from the Portuguese Navy and who has dedicated many, many years of his life to, especially the last few years, to commemorating this spirit of April, the Portuguese Carnation Revolution, especially with his work with the schools, him and some of his colleagues and comrades from the Associação 25 de Abril and other forms of social society in Portugal that have taken upon themselves to commemorate and to work with the schools with the commemorating the 25 de Abril, April 25th of 1974. Meu caro amigo, Commander Jorge Bettencourt, welcome.
Hello, thank you, Denise. First of all, my apologies for the delay or for this delay, but it's real life, and so we sometimes we have problems that we don't expect. Sorry for everybody, but anyway, I'm ready now for this talk. First of all, I want to express my full appreciation for the work that Denise has done along promoting the Portuguese culture and also the values of April. For some years we have since the fourth I was in Berkeley with you in 9 years ago. And so thank you very much, Denise, for your outstanding work. You are on mute.
Thank you for that as well. Thank you, Commander, and thank you for your work. And let's talk a little bit before we have, I think, a very comprehensive presentation today, and I thank you for your time. What are, you mentioned there, and there are, whether they be students, whether they be Portuguese Americans, many of them are second and third generation, whose grandparents or great-grandparents were the ones that came from Portugal, many of them from the archipelagos of the Azores and Madeira. And as you know, you lived here in California. We talked about that on one of your last appearances. And so lived and studied here in California. What are the values of April to you as someone who was a young cadet in the Portuguese military at the time, in the Portuguese Navy, and who saw firsthand the revolution, who has now been having an active role, passing this legacy to the students, to young students? What to you are the values of April?
First of all, liberty. That's the main point that I always made with the young people is liberty, because for us liberty is so precious, important. in the Portugal of 50 years ago, liberty was so precious. That's one of the main. But after that, democracy, equality, the respect for the needs of the people that really needs socially and economically, they have needs that has to be satisfied, and that's basically what everybody that was involved on the coup, a military coup, because 25 de Abril started with a military coup and then became a revolution. Everybody that was involved, as you said, I was young. I was not 24 years old. I was not so young, but anyway, I was leaving the Naval Academy at that time. And so, but I was involved since from the beginning and even during the preparation and so on. But I had no active role on the military coup. Actually, in the Navy, there was not too many that have because the military coup was executed essentially by the army. So that was done by the army. So the Navy was not so active, but there was a few that were very active, and I will speak about them along our conversation. What I do now, it's really talk with the children from the schools and the schools about the 25th of April and all the values that and usually I tell them stories, because for them 25th of April is something that was a long time ago. 50 years ago, it's too much for the young people, but I try to tell stories to them in order to start a conversation, start a discussion of the situation at that time, and bring those problems to the present, and then talk about their own problems nowadays.
And let's it's a perfect segue into the story that we would like to share with those who are watching us here and through the various social media outlets. And thanks again to the over 30 groups that have agreed to carry us as well. So one of these stories that you wrote, that you told, we actually have it translated to English, or you have it translated to English, and in a video. And so tell us a little bit about this story and how this story came about, setting the kind of context for what we're going to watch.
Okay, sure, of course. This is actually the last story that I wrote to the for children from that are on the third and the fourth grade in elementary school. So I have to tell them stories, and this story, everything is real, everything are facts, that unless the relation between house and the fort, that I will explain what was that relation. That it's the only thing that is fictional on that story. Or everything else is real, and is the story of the release of the political prisoners from one of the jails, one of the main jails that existed in Portugal, for people that did not think the same way as the government. So everything that was, everybody that opposed to the regime was jailed. In this case, there was at that time 36 men in that prison, and that's the story that I told I told to the children. I wrote to tell the children. We had already one section, and next week we'll have two more conversations with in a different school. And I just translated to the English. I hope that it's of interest to our audience.
I'm sure it will be, and I watched it, and it's well done. It's very well done, actually. So we'll share this, and I'm going to share it hopefully, and the commander will tell me if we can see it. I hope we can, and also to tell us if I can hear it here, but sometimes I want to make sure that everybody is listening to it as well. So hopefully we can see the screen now in black. It says the house and the fort, and let's see if the sound will come through.
The house and the fort. She witnessed the common criminals building new prison blocks. 3 pavilions, A, B and C, meant for political prisoners. It was true that others had already passed through the fort. Germans and Austrians in the Great War, Portuguese since the founding of Estado Novo. But now it was a serious, high-security jail. The fort, proud of its new status, kept telling the house everything that happened inside, with even more details. And the house, curious, listened to him from across the Campo de Torre and shared with him what she saw and heard, inside and outside her walls. But neither of them ever revealed to anyone else the secrets they exchanged for decades. I tried to get House to tell me some, but she never did. She kept to herself everything that the fort told her, with the same care that she kept and keeps the secrets of 5 generations of the family that lives in her. She kept to herself the stories of the prisoners and the jailers, the details of the escape in January 1960, the conversations of the agents from Political Police PBBI, who took shelter next to her during night watches, the arrivals and the departures of the prisoners and even their release after April 25, 1974. The house learned, because the fort told her, about the worry of the prisoners and the guards when they heard the first news of the military coup in Lisbon. She witnessed the arrival of the soldiers from the 10th Infantry Regiment from Aveiro in the early morning of the 25th, thinking that the forces from the 3rd Heavy Artillery Regiment and the 2nd Driving Instruction Center, which with them and the 14th Infantry Regiment formed the November Group, had already taken over the prison of the fort. She was amazed by how fast the vendors took down their stalls and tents of the traditional fair on the last Thursday of every month at Campo de Torre, after being told to leave in 5 minutes. She witnessed the astonishment of the Republican National Guard lieutenant who commanded the detachment responsible for the security of the jail when the company commander of the 10th Infantry Regiment knocked on the door and asked for their surrender. She witnessed the siege of the fort by soldiers of the 2nd Driving Instruction Center, mostly recruits, after the departure of the remaining forces of the group for Lisbon. But when I tried to get her to tell me something about the liberation of the political prisoners, she shut herself up and said nothing. If it were not for the 2 friends Carlos, Machado dos Santos on the side of the liberators, and Saraiva da Costa on the side of the liberated, it would have been very hard to know what happened in the fort during those 2 days. On April 25, 1974, there were 36 political prisoners in the fort. Carlos the Liberated was in Pavilion B, reserved for political prisoners from Maoist organizations, from LUAR and from the former African colonies. At 8 a.m. on the 25th, he and some of his companions noticed that the radio had gone silent. "It's a malfunction, it's being fixed," explained the guard on duty at the pavilion. The day was expected to be tense because they were going to start a hunger strike in solidarity with the prisoners of Caxias who were protesting prison conditions. Around 11 a.m. they realized that RTP television network was broadcasting military marches and suspected a military coup by Calza de Arriaga. When at 1 p.m. the visitors were not allowed in, they pressed the head of the guards who finally admitted that a military uprising had taken place in Lisbon, that Marcelo Caetano's government had been overthrown and that the main leaders of the regime had been arrested. He attributed the direction of the military coup to an MFA and to General Spinola. Worried about being used as hostages, political prisoners broke off dialogue with prison forces and built barricades. They demanded immediate release and were barricaded by it until about 4 p.m. on the 26th. At this time, in Cova de Moura, in Lisbon, Colonel Vasco Gonçalves entered the office where the officers of the Navy were and asked for a volunteer to participate in the release of the political prisoners of the fort of Peniche. Lieutenant Commander Machado dos Santos, the Carlos the Liberator, volunteered for the mission and, with Major Moreira de Azevedo, was taken by Vasco Gonçalves to the presence of General Spínola. Spínola, after a dissertation on the limitations he imposed on the release of prisoners, those who were accused of crimes such as murder, bank robbery, forgery of documents, would not be released, and a punch on the table after Carlos the Liberator contradicted him, ordered the two officers to leave immediately for Peniche, accompanied by 3 lawyers who would solve all the legal issues. After the trip in the Mercedes of the former Minister of Defense, the group reached Campo de Torre around 10 p.m., where about 1,000 people and relatives of the prisoners applauded and criticized them for being late. They banged on the fort's door and were received by the lieutenant of the Republican National Guard who commanded the garrison that remained there after the occupation. They found out that the army commander who had seized the fort was uncooperative, so they replaced him with his deputy in a makeshift tribunal in the jail director's office. Carlos the Liberator chaired it, with the deputy of the army company on his left and the 3 lawyers appointed by Spínola on his right. The first prisoner was called. Carlos the Liberator convinced the lawyers that they should stay out of the way so that the release process could go faster, until they reached the 4 prisoners accused of blood crimes, 3 linked to the FAP, Popular Action Front, and accused of the execution of a paid informant who had exposed them, and 1 who took part in the assault on the Santa Maria ship, on the night of January 21 to 22, 1961. After the prisoners incarcerated in other pavilions had left, the prisoners of Pavilion B, where Carlos the Liberated was, decided unanimously, we all leave, or no one leaves. And that's what happened. Only after Carlos the Liberator proposed that a term of responsibility be drawn up, on jail letterhead and in triplicate, signed by Moreira de Azevedo, Machado dos Santos and the lawyer Macaista Malheiros, who declared that the 3 prisoners accused of blood crimes would remain in his private residence in Lisbon, awaiting the final decision of the National Salvation Junta. The process of liberation has been finalized. And so it was that, already on the 27th, the House saw all the remaining political prisoners leave the fort to receive the unforgettable embrace of the people of Peniche. And I learned that afterwards the lieutenant of the Republican National Guard invited the 2 officers and the 3 lawyers to a supper of freshly caught and roasted fish in loco, accompanied by the appropriate solid and liquid compliments, before they returned to Lisbon in the ministerial Mercedes. The House and the fort did not know, but I knew because Carlos the Liberator told me that on the afternoon of the 27th, the 2 officers of the MFA went to Cova de Moura to report their mission to General Spínola and to discuss the issue of the conditional releases. They only met Admiral Rosa Coutinho, who had witnessed the scene of the previous day and who wrote and signed an order of prescription of custody, while saying, "You know, this is going much faster than anticipated."
Muito bem, e portanto, na realidade, let's talk in English a little bit. I always want to switch to Portuguese, but we're doing this in English.
Yes.
So the house has a story, of course, and the house is something, of course, near to your heart. And the other thing is, Commander, that Peniche is when we talk about political prisoners, we talk of Caxias. I mean, it's like, Caxias. And very few people even know of this story of Peniche. Why did you feel it was important to bring that to the forefront?
I felt exactly because of that, because all the focus was on Caxias, or everybody spoke about Caxias, because Caxias is very close to Lisbon. And the reality, there was other prisons. One much more important than Caxias was Peniche, and there was another one in Cabo Verde that was Tarrafal, which was a very bad prison. And I really thought that would be interesting to speak about something that was out of Lisbon, out of the capital. And it's a true story that was of the capital, and actually they were the last prisoners to be released in all that process. And the story also shows that were some, let's say, some contradictions on all the process, because in our program, it was supposed to release all the political prisoners, was to liberate all the political prisoners, was to extinguish, it was supposed to extinguish the political police, the PID. And what happened on the night of 25th of April is that Spínola changed the program and create, as you heard in the story, did not extinguish the political police, and tried to maintain some of the political prisoners. And that was the armed forces movement, the MFA, or the officers of the MFA, that tried to change things again to the beginning and to the original idea. And this story exactly is an example of all the discussions and all everything that happens during those 2 days. Let's say 2 days, because those are 2 days of usually we speak about the 25th of April. The takeover of the government and the end of the day, but then afterwards there are other problems to be solved by the officers, by the members of the MFA. And this was one good example, because Machado dos Santos was a Navy officer that was involved on this process, and a friend of mine that is also doing nowadays is participating on this project that we call Sowing April, where we tell this story. He goes with me to the schools and he tells exactly what happened on that prison during those 2 days. And for the kids is very, very, very interesting to see the real. Unfortunately, I cannot take Machado dos Santos because he already left. He died 2 years ago. But Carlos Saraiva da Costa, Carlos the Liberated, it's still alive and in good health, and helps me on this talks with the children.
Sometimes we don't talk a lot about that when we talk about the revolution. We talk about, like you said, the romantic part of the revolution, the carnations, and the peacefulness, of the revolution. And what NBC News years ago, actually 4 years ago, for the 45th celebration in NBC News here in the States, did a wonderful piece called Portugal's military coup, the coolest military coup, or the coolest military coup in the world. But tensions were high when it came to political prisoners.
Yes, and came to the political police also.
Indeed. And so there was a little bit of discrepancy there and disagreement between the MFA and Spínola.
That's one of, let's say, one of the foundation, one of the contradiction of all this process was exactly this tension between the Spínola that want to make things in its own way, and the MFA try to do things according to the program, because we agreed on a political program before the military coup, and he knew the program, but on the night he tried to change it, to modify it. And one of the points, there is one third point that was important, was to allow the right of the independence to the colonies, that also wrote off the program, and then that creates lots of problems in the colonies. And actually, I lived some of those problems, because right after the 25th of April, I was assigned to Angola, and I was there, and I had the opportunity to see how things went wrong, because nothing was things were not very clear on the mind of everybody. But this problem of the political prisoners, yes, that was something, and it's why it took 2 days to liberate them.
And so when you talk about Spínola, he took a little bit more of a conservative role once he took the power of the Junta Nacional Salvação.
I would say more authoritarian role.
Wow.
Because he was in the night of the 25th of April, when there was a center of operation that was where was Hotel Saraiva de Carvalho, Crespo, etc. All the main leaders of the movement were there, and they commanded the military operation along the day. And that night, Spínola appears and say, "Okay, you did a very good job, but now I take over everything, and you can go home and rest." And one of them actually was Admiral Crespo, that was the Navy officer, the only Navy officer that was in the post of command. That was the center of the operation. And he told Spínola, "General, our troops are still in the streets, and so we have to comply with the program, and we cannot do things as you wish, because there is a program, and the program has to be respected." Because we had the one of the main characteristics that makes 25 de Abril different from all other military coup is that we had a political program that pointed to democracy, to liberty, and so on, and that was very clear. And he tried to modify the direction, and afterwards there was months of tension between him and the movement, and the officers of the movement. Officers were very young officers. We are talking about people on their 30s. Mm-hmm. Or 40s at most, and so was young people that were not interested in South American type revolutions or military coup. No, our goal was to have a democracy in Portugal, and to have liberty in Portugal.
When we talk about something that you mentioned, the not so clear direction after the revolution, and that you yourself, as part of the Portuguese Navy, were sent to Angola. And so, of course, for those of you watching, now 5 Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa. At that time, there were Portuguese colonies, and there were 3 of them that, where there was a war going on before the revolution. Some of the criticism, and amongst especially Portuguese Americans or Americans who are of Portuguese ancestry, was the process of decolonization. And as you know, because some families had family there, and then they,
I had
you yourself, and some had families that were left had to leave, of course, these territories, now independent nations, and some ended up here in the United States. So, what do you attribute some of those dilemmas of the decolonization process that indeed had to be done, and it was one of the reasons we had the revolution, correct?
Yeah, yes. One of the reasons was at least to solve the war,
right?
Because we believed and we were really convinced that the war had to have a political solution, not a military solution. And but what happened really was that in this type of process, social and political and military process, is very difficult to foresee the future and to control and all the forces. And I can speak Angola because I was there, but all the other colonies probably was the same problem. But in Angola was very difficult. Was very difficult for us to control the situation because there was so many powers involved on that situation that. And it's not easy to control. I agree that was not. We would like to do things in a very different way, for sure. We are not proud of of things that happen in those colonies, for sure. But okay, we tried to do our best, but was very difficult to do it because the situation was very, very, very difficult to control.
Indeed, war had escalated to such a point, and as you mentioned, there were lots of different interests and national and international interests, because we were kind of to remind those who are following us, especially the students, this was at a high point of the Cold War.
Yes, actually, the liberation movement, for example, in Angola, there was 3 liberation movements, and they were supported by Soviet Union, by the United States, and by some European countries, and so European powers. So all the powers of the world were involved in Angola, and so it's not in those liberation movements they were supported, and they were they defend their interests, not the Portuguese interests or even the Portuguese people that lived in Angola. That's true. Although the people believe that they were supporting them, but that's not the case.
And as someone in the Portuguese military sent to Angola, how was your mission difficulted by this process? How did you live those years in Angola?
That was very difficult. I was in a frigate. I was assigned in a frigate. And we had several missions during that period. One of the missions, for example, was to take prisoners, supposedly delinquents, from Luanda to Campo de São Nicolau. Campo de São Nicolau was another prison that was in the south of Angola. In the beginning of the clashes in Luanda, there was clashes between the whites and the black and so on. It was racial situation, not easy. And one of the things they did was the police send the people and we carry them to São Nicolau. And in the first trip, okay, for sure they were delinquents. The second trip, probably some of them were already political prisons, and on the third most of them were political prisons already. So that someone was using our frigate to carry new political prisons for São Nicolau, which was not right, and so we had to say no, we will not do that, because this is people that is we did not make the revolution to have new political prisoners in Angola. In this case, was in Angola. I don't know what was, but in Angola that was the case, for example.
And so this period, right post revolution that you spent in Angola, you were in a frigate, but you were obviously were able to see. What's your impression of that transition to, with all these powers, with all these hungry world powers wanting to control?
Nobody was prepared for that. Okay. Nobody was prepared for that, and we had no forces to avoid that, because one of the, for example, besides the political prison, the people to São Nicolau, we had to carry our troops, army troops from Cabinda, special from Cabinda to Luanda, because was much easier to bring them by a frigate, to use a frigate to bring them to Luanda. And you don't imagine the state of mind of those soldiers. They were really in a bad shape, lots of problems with drugs. Army was really problems with drugs and drinking problems and so on. So that those forces were not in condition to continue the fight. Let's say they were in a situation that they were not in condition. And of course, they want to come to go back to Portugal. Sure. Because as you know, probably our audience does know, but most of them were just people that was conscripts. They were sent to fight in Angola, but they were not from Angola. They were from Açores, from Madeira, from mainland Portugal, and that was not their land. They were just there because they were sent there to fight. And when they saw an opportunity not to stop the war, they just want to go back to Portugal, for sure, to their homes.
And you said you yourself had family in Angola as well.
In Mozambique.
In Mozambique, that's right, in Mozambique. And how did your family adapt to this change? Do you remember?
Not well, but they were able to live. With the exception maybe from an uncle, all the others were able to live as they planned the living, and they returned to Portugal, or some of them came to Portugal, and others went to the South Africa. But they left Mozambique. Yes, they left Mozambique.
As you said, also decolonization, there are some things that Portugal isn't proud of, as you said. There are some things that could have gone better, but had war escalated already to such a point, and all of the involvement of these three political powers, as you mentioned, powers in Europe, the Soviet Union, and powers of the United States, that there was no other way at the time. It was as I think, I don't know if it was Mário Soares at one time was saying, there was a descolonização possível. So it was what could have been done, or do you think that Portugal could have done something different at the time, that in hindsight, of course?
No, I don't think that decolonization could be done better if it was done 5 years earlier, correct. 6 years earlier.
Correct. But
at that stage was almost impossible, because we went too far. Because, for example, in Angola the situation was very stable, but in Mozambique we are losing the war. In Guinea we were losing the war, and when we are losing a war, it's very difficult to make peace, and it's very difficult to control the situation. United States know very well the process like this. It's very difficult to solve a problem when we keep the war to a level that it's difficult to control, and we to a non-return point, it's very difficult to solve the situation, for sure. And I didn't like to see the luggage of the Portuguese that were leaving Luanda, for sure, on the port of Luanda. It was a very bad, for me, it was a very bad sensation, but it was very difficult to avoid that.
Sure, sure. Let's take it back a little bit to the story, of course, of the house and Peniche and the political prisoners. Sometimes when people outside of Portugal, and even an older generation of Americans of Portuguese ancestry, they say, "Oh, well, Salazar was kind of a benevolent dictator." He wasn't so benevolent of a system, and continued with Caetano as well, in that there were quite a few political prisoners for such a small country that Portugal was.
No, actually, in that story, I had a picture of a young guy. In my video, there is a picture of a guy that was a prisoner. He was in Aljube, he was in Caxias. Actually, he was a cousin of mine. So he is my family. He was, and so it's not an unknown. It's someone that I knew when I remember when first time I visit Portugal, mainland Portugal, because I was born in Mozambique. I lived there, and the first time I visited the mainland I was 5 years old. And then I returned when I was 10 years old, and I had to study the rivers of Portugal, the railways of mainland Portugal, and things like having no idea of what that kind of land was, or that kind of rivers, or that kind of railway. And when I came to Portugal, it's my trip to Portugal, to mainland Portugal in 1955 or 56, I met that guy, and he has been released from Tarrafal because he was dying, and he was sent to Portugal, to return to Portugal. He was tried because he stayed in the prison for 6 years with no trial. So the benevolence of Salazar was like this: a guy that was sent to jail in Tarrafal. It was the worst jail, one of the worst jails in the world. He stayed there for 6 years, and he was dying, and they sent them to Portugal. In 1 week they tried him, and he was accused of against the government and something, and a pena, como é que se diz, a pena de prisão, que foi condenado. He was condemned to 2 years of, so he stayed in the prison 6 years, and then was condemned
another 2 years.
After 6 years for two years. If you read that paper that is on the video, it's everything is there.
So
this tells what Salazar. It's a myth. Salazar was, or the political police was not so nice as they used to say. No, it was nothing.
And how, as a student also of history and someone who lived in the revolution, but taking it back a little bit, how important was speed from your perspective, in keeping actually the power of the dictator for so many years? What role, in your perspective?
Speed was an instrument of the power of that regime, for sure. Was one of the pillars. The other one was the armed forces. Armed forces was another pillar of that regime, and that was the surprise. It's why they were so surprised when they saw that was from one of those pillars that came the movement of the armed forces movement. And for me, it's because Vincing the Brill, for sure, was not the best secret, the best, how do you say, the
best kept secret.
The best kept secret in the world, because everybody knew that something was going to happen. And for me, it's very strange why they didn't act. Probably they thought that the armed forces would never go against the regime. And it's interesting that a comrade of mine, Luis Costa Correia, he was the guy that command the forces that took over PID on the 25th of April, the next day, in the morning of the next day. And he was with Silva Paz. Silva Paz was the director general of the PID. And Silva Paz told him, okay, we are with the armed forces movement. And he said, okay, if you are with us, please take the portraits of Salazar and Marcelo Caetano from the wall. And the guys sent someone to take down the portrait. So the PID was very important. And I really don't. I still don't know how they were kept. They were surprised by the revolution or by the military coup, because actually it was a military coup in the beginning. Revolution was a process afterwards, but they were catch by surprise for sure.
Yeah, and you attribute that somewhat to maybe that they would find that the pro-government forces of the military might be stronger than the anti-military forces that eventually did have the military coup.
Probably, yeah, and they believe, and probably Spinola was involved on this. So Spinola wanted a solution that was halfway.
Mm-hmm. He kind of played both sides of the fences, as we say in English.
That's right. That's right. He played both sides. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, some people claim that if it wasn't for him, there would be bloodshed in the streets. But
no,
I don't. I mean, it's more than proven that's not reality.
Yeah, that's false. It's completely false. And one of the instruction that our troops, our forces, one of the instruction for them was to avoid bloodshed, to avoid any fight. Even, for example, speaking about Peniche, when the guy, the captain that knock on the door and tell to them that they had to surrender, and they said, no, we will not surrender, because at that time the PID was still inside of the prison. They just stay outside, but they did not. They decided not to go against them, and they just control them and to avoid any type of bloodshed. So all the instruction was not to that military coup should not be a violent action.
Right.
So that the idea. Actually, the only people that they were killed by the military police from the windows of the military, the PID headquarters.
So it's a complete myth to say that without Spinola's intervention there would have been bloodshed. It's a myth.
No.
Yes.
Actually, I believe that he tried to do some
harm. Yeah.
Some harm. So.
Yeah.
Later on, he used the forces against us. Yeah. That was very clear in our minds, in everybody's mind. That should be a peaceful action, and the idea was to avoid any kind of bloodshed. That for sure.
As we come to the end of this conversation, and I want to thank you for spending this hour with us. As we begin the reflection that I would actually like to have with you, and off and on, between now and when you come to the United States next year in March or April, we will not let you forget that. Reflecting a little bit on as we approach the 50 years. I mean, it's every year is important, but this is a special commemoration because we kind of set these marks, in our own minds, 40 years, 50 years. How do you look at Portugal today, 50 years, and in relation to the work that you're doing, you and your comrades and your friends with the schools? Is there a danger that the Portuguese are forgetting that 50 years ago, because it had not happened yet, 50 years ago, there were these prisons, there were prisoners in Peniche and Caxias and Tarrafal and many other places, and Portugal was kind of a backward nation in many ways. What are your thoughts first on these 50 years and your work with the schools? Why do you do it?
What I do, I don't know. I do for the children, for my grandchildren, I do for them. And I believe that really the values that we believed 50 years ago are still valid. And we are not, it's not propaganda. We are just talking about them. We talk about democracy, we talk about freedom, and that's it. And what's very interesting is that we continue every year. We don't feel any lack of interest from there. They listen to us from the third grade to the 12th grade. They receive us very well. They like to be with us. It's every year I speak with thousands of students from different schools, and that's very nice. A nice feeling. And about Portugal, okay, we have problems, as you know. We changed a lot. We used to be a country that provides immigrants to the world. Now we receive the immigrants from the world. So it's a completely different reality. Actually, in one of the schools that I'm doing this project of the sewing April, in one of the class, the first grade class, they were all foreign. There was no one born in Portugal in that class. In 25 or 26 students,
that's amazing.
Children, they were all. Two of them were born in the United States. We have immigrants from the United States in Portugal, which is a completely different reality. And so we live in a different country with lots of problems. But I still, even the reason why I was late, I went with my mother to the doctor in an hospital, a public hospital, cardiology, and she was very well treated. One of the gains of the 25 de Abril was exactly that type of the National Health Service that still provides, okay, lots of problems, everybody complains, but anyway, we are still going there. My mother was treated, made exams and so on. We didn't pay a cent. We didn't pay nothing. Because she is 95 years old, so they don't take. She has not to pay nothing. So and she was treated with very good, with sympathy and with attention on that hospital. So I have to believe, with that experience, I have to believe that the 25th of April, and when I compare what happened. Let me share with you my personal experience. About 1 month and a half before the 25th of April, I had my first son was born, and he has a problem, congenital problem, and he died 10 years after he was born. And I had the opportunity as a young guy, we and my wife as a young couple, we had the opportunity to see what was one of the, because my son was sent to the Hospital Santa Maria. Hospital Santa Maria was the biggest hospital in Portugal at that time. It probably still is, but I saw the problems that the health care had at that time. Lack of resources, lots of problems. So I could compare 1 month before 25th with today, that I went to a public hospital with my mother. It's a completely different reality. It has nothing to do. It's 50 years that changed totally. In the health sector, that was one of the main areas where there was lots of different. There is a big difference between what was before and after the 25th of April.
Yes, I if I may share one kind of not similar. Obviously, that was very. I can only imagine what you and your wife went through. But my grandfather, who had been in the United States, who went back in 1928, who went back to the Azores and bought a house and 140 acres. That's a lot of land in Terceira.
Yeah,
140 acres. And he was a pretty wealthy man for his time, but he had a heart issue and he could pay for it. But there were no medications. The doctor would prescribe when he had health issues of the heart. The doctor prescribed, because I was 9 years old and 8 years old, and I would go get it for him. I would go to a place called the Venda, which was, like a little small market, and I would go get him 2 tablespoons of olive oil. That is what the doctor prescribed, because there were no medications, and my grandfather could afford it. So it was such a, and this was, of course, this was 1966, 67, but this was basically, just not very many years before the revolution of 70.
1 month before the revolution, when my son was in the hospital, the diapers of the babies were pieces of old sheets that they just used for diapers, because they had no diapers for the children, and we had to take everything from home for the hospital.
Indeed.
So it's really when we compare Portugal now, okay, it's 50 years of difference, but sure. Portugal before the 25th of April was something that should not happen again, because it's was something. Of course, there are people that believes that it was the people tends to forget the bad things and only reminds the nice things, but there was lots of bad things in Portugal at that time, and that's the reason why we did the 25th of April.
Well, thank you, Commander, for your time. Thank you for your service, and thank you for all that you have done, and for that wonderful work with the students, because I think that's where the seed is planted. I think that is so important, that they're able to see today, and they, actual people who were, part of, like you said, you weren't involved directly in the revolution, but you were in the Navy. You were 24 years old. And it's as children, whether they are 8 years old or 16 years old, it's important to see these because they look at the movies and they look at maybe some of the key faces, of the revolution, but they don't. It's important to see people that that lived that moment. And let me ask you one last question, and it's off topic a little bit, but I know you're a multidisciplinary person. So, so as someone who goes to these schools and someone who sees this and lives, of course, Portugal day to day and is very well informed, I know that you keep yourself very well informed of what's going on in Portugal. How do you see our country, Portugal, receiving as a country who receives immigrants instead of one who sends immigrants? I mean, as you said, we had a story for, forever, and in the archipelago since the 19th century, but in mainland Portugal since World War II, especially, of sending people out. How do we do? Do we do a pretty good job of receiving others from other parts of the world, in your perspective?
I still believe that we are doing a good job.
Good.
Because I feel that the kids that I met in the schools are well treated, are well received, and I think that. But there are dangers in
sure.
Okay, as you know, there are the the racist movements and
Correct.
so on are all over the world, and we still have them but we believe that we are still a friendly country for the foreigners. I believe that and they live well here. They like to be here. I don't feel that they are, and especially the children, that are very well integrated.
I don't want to bring any politics in this, but I must ask because it's part of the moment. As we go all the way from, as you mentioned, the political prisoners to the freedoms to immigration to where we are today, how much of a threat to democracy do you feel movements like Chega and those ultra-right are for Portugal and for European nations as well?
They are a threat, and we are here to fight against them. Again, 50 years after, we are still we are here. We will fight as tough as we can, but anyway, we are not going to do any armed movements, but they are a threat for sure, and we have to do everything to tell the children and the young people what is democracy, what is liberty, and it's not for granted. So they have to fight for it, they have to defend it, and that's it. It's the only thing that we can do is to. And one of the reasons why I'm going to the schools and they invite me is because they feel that I can bring them some hope, or some hope for the future, which is good for them and for me. Because I also learn from them.
I'm sure we all do. Yeah, we learn from our students immensely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Commander Jorge Bettencourt. Appreciate your time, appreciate your knowledge, appreciate your honesty, and appreciate your willingness to spend time with our students, with those following us here, and with those following us on social media as well. Thank you very much.
It was a pleasure for me to speak with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that what I said was useful for your students.
It is useful. It's going to be useful today and in the future as well. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Muito boa tarde. Boa tarde.
Boa
Obrigado.
tarde.